Welcome to Southern Bedtime Stories. Tonight we're going to be reading some Hobbit lore, some tales from the Shire, if you will. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. It was a fine and lazy sort of afternoon in Buckland, the kind that made a respectable hobbit feel guilty for doing anything too productive. The sun was high and golden, the sky a polite sort of blue, and the bees were bumbling contentedly around a patch of sunflowers so tall they could have passed for menfolk if they'd worn waistcoats. Merry Brandybuck, who was inclined toward clever ideas and well-timed naps, was lying with his back against the broad roots of an old elm tree just south of Brandy Hall. Beside him, Peregrine Took, lighter in foot and even lighter in thought, lay sprawled in the grass, eyes squinting at the sun through lazy puffs of smoke. The pipeweed was South Farthing's finest, sweet and grassy, and the air was thick with its curling scent. Somewhere nearby, a small creek murmured over stones, sounding rather like it was whispering secrets to the moss. "The floating log in Frogmorton," Pippin declared, waving his pipe for emphasis, "serves the smoothest amber ale this side of the Brandywine. Goes down like spring rain, it does." "Rubbish," Merry said, not unkindly. "The Green Dragon's got it beat in both body and bite. Everyone says so." "Not everyone," Pippin countered. "Bilbo says the Bridge Inn near the Brandywine Bridge has a brown ale that could put hair on your toes." "Well, that's not saying much. We've already got hairy toes." "Well then, Frodo," Pippin continued, undeterred, "swears the Golden Perch in East Farthing serves a golden ale worth walking all the way there barefoot." Merry puffed thoughtfully. "He would say that. He's always had lofty tastes. Bit o' took in him." "A bit o' baggins in you," Pippin said with a grin. "You're halfway to writing poetry in your diary, Merry." "Well, I don't keep a diary." "You would if the floating log brewed better ale." They both laughed, and a bee drifted past, unconcerned with ale or hobbits. The creek gurgled on, the sunflowers nodded in the breeze, and a few white clouds drifted overhead like sheep with nowhere to be. It was the kind of day that promised adventure to those foolish enough to chase it, or a second lunch to those wise enough to stay put. Pippin took a long pull from his pipe, letting out a contented sigh. "We've tasted every ale from here to Hobbiton, and we still argue." "Only because you have no taste," Merry said. "Maybe," Pippin grinned. "The best ale is just the one you share with your friends." Merry smiled at that. "There's some wisdom in you after all." They fell into a companionable silence, but silence, like pipeweed, only lasts so long on an empty stomach. Pippin's belly gave an audible grumble. "Is it just me, or is it time for lunch?" "You've had lunch," Merry said. "That was first lunch. I'm speaking of second lunch." Merry patted his own stomach. "Aye, now that you mention it, I wouldn't say no to something hot and buttery." "I heard your mom's making mushroom pie today." "And she's guarding it like a dragon guards gold." Merry sat up a little. "But I also heard just this morning from Cousin Barrelac that old Farmer Maggot's got a bumper crop this year. Taters as big as your fist, cabbages so green they sparkle." Pippin's eyes lit up. "And, where there are cabbages and taters," Merry finished. They looked at each other. "Just a few," Merry said innocently. "For sharing." "Wouldn't be right not to share," Pippin agreed. "He has so many, we'd be doing him a service, really. Lightening his load, harvesting early, preventing spoilage." "Truly," said Pippin, with great seriousness, "we're heroes." The bees buzzed agreement, or perhaps warning. It's hard to tell with bees. As if summoned by their stomachs, which would have been no surprise to anyone who knew them, The faint sound of clopping hooves echoed down the lane beyond the trees. Merry tilted his head. That'll be someone headed towards Bam Furlong. They both sat up a bit straighter. Through a gap in the hedgerow, they caught sight of a broad wooden cart trundling along the dusty path, drawn by a shaggy-footed bay pony. Sitting atop it, reins in hand and straw hat tilted back, was none other than Farmer Maggot himself, grumbling to no one in particular and bouncing gently with the ruts in the road. The cart was stacked high with fat, glistening cabbages piled like green cannonballs. "Looks like he's hauling his crop to market," Merry observed. "Looks like he's not at home," Pippin said, eyes gleaming. They shared a look. Merry raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." "I hope so," Pippin grinned, "because I'm thinking those cabbages aren't the only ones ripe for the picking. And if the good farmer is on the road, then Bam Furlong is presently unguarded." Merry stood, brushing crumbs from his waistcoat. "We'll be quick. We'll be quiet. And we'll only take the odd tater and cabbage, the sort that won't be missed." "Just enough for a roast," Pippin agreed solemnly. "Maybe a stew. Maybe 2 stews." They paused, then added in unison, "To share." The bees buzzed again, this time sounding a little bit skeptical. They lingered a moment at the edge of the lane, peering down the road to make absolutely certain Farmer Maggot wasn't going to turn round and come bouncing back. But no, he was well on his way, singing a song about turnips and pipeweed, or possibly confusing the two. Still, Merry hesitated. "There's just the small matter of the dogs," he said. Pippin froze. "Oh, you remember the dogs. Great hairy beasts, with teeth like gardening shears, and breath like a troll's laundry." They both nodded grimly. Merry scratched behind his ear. "Frodo says they chased him straight through 3 fences and into a goose pond when he was just a lad. Didn't he lose his jacket? He lost a jacket, 2 buttons, and a good deal of his dignity. Swore he'd never go near Maggot's farm again." "And he hasn't," Pippin said. "Not in 20 years." A breeze rustled the leaves above. Somewhere, a distant cow mooed as if in warning. "But," Merry said slowly, "if we were to distract the dogs with something they like even more than biting hobbits, like bones, old bones, from the rubbish heap," Pippin said, grinning. They looked at each other. It was, objectively speaking, a terrible idea. But it was the sort of terrible idea that, for a brandy buck and a took, practically qualified as a well-laid plan. "Fetch the bones," Merry said. Pippin gave a mock salute. "Operation Tater Acquisition is go." The rubbish heap behind Brandy Hall was, like many things in Buckland, better organized than it looked. Pippin rooted around with a stick, humming something heroic, until he triumphantly uncovered a trio of old mutton bones, gnarled and greasy, perfect for canine bribery. "Not sure what that says about our taste in stew," Merry muttered, eyeing the bones with suspicion. "They smell like victory," Pippin declared, wrapping them in a torn scrap of burlap. "Or possibly defeat. Hard to tell." With their tools in hand and mischief in their hearts, the pair set off, cutting across the meadows toward the Maggot farm. The sun was beginning its slow golden dip toward evening, casting long shadows from the hedgerows and making the air hum with the promise of supper. Birds chirped as if to say, "You're going the wrong way," but Merry and Pippin ignored them. They dropped low when they reached the stone wall at the edge of Bam Furlong, creeping like conspirators. The scent of tilled earth and onion tops drifted towards them. A wooden gate stood ajar. Ahead and beyond it stretched neat rows of vegetables, sun-warm and tempting. Fat cabbages huddled in clusters, and leafy greens trembled in the breeze like they knew they were being hunted. Pippin peeked over the wall. "It's quiet. Too quiet," Merry said with dramatic flair. A low woof sounded from somewhere in the yard. They froze. "Right," Merry whispered. "Time to deploy the meat-based diversion." Pippin unwrapped the bones with reverence, holding them aloft like ancient relics. Let's see if Maggot's hounds still favor the taste of Bucklander stew. With a deep breath and far more confidence than they possessed, the two hobbits slipped through the gate and into the unknown, well, mostly unknown, terrain of Farmer Maggot's farm. The plan, such as it was, called for subterfuge. "I'll handle the distraction," Pippin whispered, clutching the sack of bones like sacred treasure. "You go for the goods, Merry." "Try not to get mauled," Merry muttered, already crouching low and eyeing the cabbage patch. "If the dogs eat you, I'm not rescuing what's left." "That's the spirit." With a final nod, they separated. Merry darted left toward the rows of leafy vegetables, while Pippin crept straight down the main path toward the kennels, where the hounds of legend presumably dozed in their lairs, dreaming of trousers torn and hobbits treed. Pippin whistled, just a little, and lobbed the first bone over the fence. A moment later there was a scrabble, a snuffle, and then a low growl that gave him second thoughts about all his life choices. Two dark shapes bounded into view, tails wagging like excited flags. "Right, gentlemen," Pippin called, brandishing another bone. "Let's not be hasty. There's more where that came from." He flung the second and third bones in opposite directions. The hounds bolted after them with great enthusiasm, one to the left, one to the right, both disappearing behind the sheds in a flurry of paws and slobber. Pippin didn't wait to be thanked. He turned on his heel and sprinted the other way, bare feet slapping earth, muttering to himself, "They're good dogs, very good dogs, the best dogs. Please stay gone." Meanwhile, Merry had slipped between the cabbage rows like a well-trained badger. He crouched, poked, prodded, and selected only the choicest specimens, a cabbage as big as his head, and a tater with the dignity of a dinner guest, and a handful of carrots he pulled with surgical precision. He stuffed them into a flour sack he'd brought just for the occasion, glancing up now and then at the sound of distant rustling, which he dearly hoped was not four-legged. Pippin skidded to a stop beside him, panting. "Distraction deployed. Bones delivered. Dogs fully engrossed." Merry didn't even look up. "Did they see you?" "I don't think they saw anything once the bones hit the ground. One of them might have started crying with joy." "Well, good. Grab another tater and let's go." Together they crept back to the stone wall, sack full of spoils between them, and rolled into a thicket of brambles with all the grace of a sack race champion in a thunderstorm. They crouched in the brambles, catching their breath and checking for scratches, burrs, or signs of canine pursuit. The sack of vegetables sat between them like a trophy. "Well," Merry said, brushing a twig from his sleeve, "we've earned our supper." "We've earned several suppers," Pippin agreed. "Mushroom pie, roasted cabbage, carrot mash, and tater stew." They grinned at each other like burglars with a dragon's hoard, then rose carefully and made their way toward the narrow footpath that led out through the hedgerows. And that's when they saw it. Just off the path, tucked between a shed and a lean-to, it stood in all its round-bellied glory. A barrel. A very large barrel. A well-worn mug hung beside it, and painted in crooked white letters across the front were the words, "Maggot's Strong Brew." The sunlight struck the rim just so, and it gleamed like a golden chalice in a song of old. A breeze rustled the grass, and they could almost hear the faint chime of ale sloshing within, hops, barley, wheat, and the finest Shire spring water singing a siren's call. Pippin stopped dead. "Is that?" "It is," Merry said reverently. Do you think it's... It must be. The mug swayed gently in the wind like it was beckoning. Pippin looked at Merry. We can't not try it. We've had ale from every inn between Hobbiton and Stock, and we were just saying we can't properly rank the best if we've never tried maggots. It'd be irresponsible, Pippin said. Practically dishonest, Merry replied. They looked around. No Farmer Maggot, no dogs, no witnesses. Merry stepped forward. For research. Pippin nodded solemnly. For fairness. Merry pulled the cork, and the rich, yeasty scent of something dark and wonderful met them like an old friend. He filled the mug halfway. Pippin held out a second, slightly cracked cup he had produced from his coat pocket. He always brought one along just in case, and Merry filled that too. To the brewers of the Shire, Pippin toasted. To science, Merry toasted. They drank. It was magnificent. The first mug was glorious. The second was transcendent. By the third, the world had gone a bit hazy and wonderful, like looking through the bottom of a pickle jar. Merry leaned back against the barrel, legs stretched out, mug rested on his belly. This, he said, is a deeply misunderstood vintage, a hidden gem, criminally underappreciated. Criminal being the operative word, Pippin said, though he was already halfway through his next pour. Do you taste apples? I taste apples and a whisper of turnip, possibly parsnip, but noble, Merry replied. The mug swayed again in the breeze, or perhaps that was Merry swaying. Either way, it was all very philosophical. They lit their pipes, naturally, because nothing pairs with a questionable life choice like a bit of old Toby, and sat puffing away in the warm afternoon light, surrounded by the comfort and smells of cut grass, pipeweed, cabbage leaves, and faintly fermenting something or other. Time, as it does in such situations, begins to wobble. They debated the relative strengths of brown ales versus golden ales. They reenacted, quite poorly, a scene from Bilbo's tale about trolls. At one point, Pippin made a crown out of carrot tops and declared himself king of the ale barrel. They were, in short, very pleased with themselves. So pleased, in fact, that they didn't hear the low growl from the other side of the shed. Nor did they notice the soft, deliberate sniffing in the grass. The dogs, as it turned out, had finished their bones some time ago. And having found them inadequate in both portion and permanence, they had returned to their usual patrol with renewed interest and excellent noses. Sometime after the third mug, and possibly during the fourth, Pippin declared he needed to step behind the hedge and pay his respects to the Brandywine River. He wobbled off, crown of carrot tops slipping jauntily over one eye. Merry remained by the barrel, eyes half closed, pipe in one hand, mug in the other. He hummed a wandering tune with no melody to speak of, and blinked up at the clouds, which were doing slow and rather excellent impersonation of floating cabbages. He might have dozed off for a minute, maybe two. The sun was warm, the ale was strong, and the world was spinning ever so gently. And then he heard it. Crunch. A soft footfall not far off. He opened one eye. That you, Pip? Silence. Back already, he called, shifting slightly. You missed a very poetic cloud. Looked just like Lobelia Sackville Baggins, with wings. Another footstep. Merry didn't move, but a sleepy grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. All right, very funny. Tread like doom all you like, but if you're trying to scare me, you'll have to do better than... He paused. Something was behind him. Close. Breathing. Hot breath tickled the back of his neck. It smelled of beef bones, compost, and possibly dirty laundry. Merry stiffened. "Pippin," he said slowly, "if this is one of your jokes, it's not—" Plop. A great, glistening dollop of drool landed squarely in his half-full mug. Merry blinked and stared at it, then turned. And there, looming over his shoulder, with a grin that could only be described as jubilantly toothy, stood a dog the size of a hay bale, or so it seemed. Its tail thumped once against the shed. Whomp. Merry didn't scream, not exactly. It was more of a startled yelp, followed by a series of panic motions that sent his pipe flying, the mug spinning, and himself rolling sideways in a graceless sprawl that knocked over the barrel. Pippin emerged from the hedge, looking immensely pleased with himself and wholly unaware of the beast towering over his cousin. "I hope you saved me a splash," he called out, stretching his arms. "I think that might have been the best ale I've ever had. Pour me a half pint, would you?" Merry, pressed against the barrel like a cornered hedgehog, didn't answer. Pippin called again. Merry?" Pippin blinked, then noticed the enormous, panting dog standing nose to nose with his cousin. "Oh." The second dog appeared behind him with uncanny silence, eyes locked on the sack of vegetables. Pippin raised his hand slowly. "Now, lads, gentle hobbits, gentle dogs, let's not do anything we'll all regret in the morning." The dogs didn't bark, they didn't growl, but they inched forward, tails stiff, muscles tensing like springs. Merry whispered, "Don't make any sudden movements." Pippin answered, "We should go." "Very quietly," Merry agreed. "Grab the sack." Merry reached for it first, and Pippin followed a moment later, both hands brushing the burlap. And that was the last straw. The dogs lunged. With twin yelps, Merry and Pippin turned and ran, abandoning mugs, reason, and all sense of decorum. The sack of produce swung wildly between them as they tore down the path. Behind them, the dogs surged forward, snapping at heels and burlap alike. One caught hold of the sack, tearing it in two with a triumphant shake. Cabbages flew, carrots scattered. A noble tater sailed high through the air before landing in a thistle patch. "Not the cabbage!" Pippin cried. "Just run!" Merry yelled. They barreled through the first fence with a crack. They stumbled over the second one, hitting the ground with a thud. They vaulted the third fence. Splash! They landed square in the shallow goose pond that Frodo Baggins had once floundered in, jacket, pride, and all. Geese exploded in every direction, honking like angry brass instruments. Pippin came up sputtering with pondweed in his mouth. Merry sat in the mud, his hair plastered to his forehead. They gasped, they coughed, they laughed just a little. Behind them in the distance, the dogs stood victorious amid the ruined sack, guarding their farm like heroes of old. The sun was sinking low behind the trees by the time Merry and Pippin squelched their way back up the hill towards Brandy Hall, dripping pond water and moral defeat in equal measure. Their feet squelched, their trousers clung, their spirits sagged. "Gone," Pippin muttered. "Every last tater." "My best pipe's still by the barrel," said Merry. "So's yours." Pippin gasped. "So it is. A tragedy. And the stew we might have made, with that one enormous cabbage, the one with the dignified air, the tater that looked like Bilbo." They sighed. Brandy Hall's kitchen lights glowed warm through the windows. A curl of steam drifted from the chimney, carrying the scent of something savory, rich, and herb-laced and uncomfortably familiar. They stepped inside. At the big kitchen table sat Cousin Barrowlack, cheerful as you please, with a bowl of stew in front of him and a heel of buttered bread in hand. He looked up, blinked, and immediately started laughing. "By the Shire, what happened to you two? Did you wrestle a pig in a thunderstorm?" "We were on a mission," Pippin said darkly. "To obtain ingredients," Merry added, dripping on the floor. Barrowlack gestured to the pot on the stove. "You mean like these?" He spooned up a bit of stew and blew on it. "Farmer Maggot came by this morning with a cartload of vegetables. Said his bumper crop was too much for the dogs to guard alone. Left a whole sack of taters and cabbages right at the back door. Didn't y'all see it?" Merry and Pippin just stood there, wet and stunned. Barrowlack slurped his stew. "It's delicious, by the way." Merry turned to Pippin. Pippin turned to Merry. They both broke into laughter, helpless, wheezing, ridiculous laughter that echoed down the long halls of Brandy Hall. Barrowlack, bemused, ladled 2 more bowls and set them out. "Sit down, you fool of a took," he said kindly. "The best things in life are shared after all." And as the moon rose over Buckland, the 2 damp hobbits sat by the fire, muddy, bruised, cabbage-scented, but full, and not just with stew. The end.